The rain came down like bullets from heaven, and through the deluge he saw her collapsed against the twisted juniper tree, shaking so violently he thought she might shake apart. Yates Quinlan pulled his horse to a stop, rain streaming from the brim of his hat, and for a moment he just stared at the young woman who looked like she had crawled through hell itself to reach this lonely stretch of trail between Parowan and Cedar City. Her dress was torn in 3 places, her dark hair plastered to her face, and when she lifted her eyes to him they held such raw terror that something in his chest constricted hard. He swung down from the saddle without a word, his boots hitting the muddy ground with a splash. The storm had come on sudden the way Utah storms did in the spring of 1878, turning the red earth to rivers of rust-colored water that ran between the sage and juniper. She tried to stand when he approached, but her legs gave out, and she would have fallen face first into the mud if he had not caught her. Her skin was cold as creek water, her lips tinged blue, and up close he could see the bruises forming along her jaw and the scratches on her arms. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible over the drumming rain. "Please don't send me back." Yates did not ask questions. He simply gathered her into his arms, feeling how light she was, how fragile, and carried her to his horse. She did not fight him, just curled against his chest like a half-drowned kitten, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. He managed to get them both into the saddle, her cradled against him, and turned the bay gelding toward the line shack he knew was about 2 miles east. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and the temperature was dropping fast as the sun disappeared behind the Markagun Plateau. The ride felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 20 minutes. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling words he could not make out, and he held her tighter, urging the horse faster. When the rough cabin finally came into view through the sheets of rain, relief flooded through him. It was not much, just a shelter for cowboys working the range, but it had a stove and dry wood and 4 walls that would keep out the storm. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her carefully on the narrow bunk against the far wall. She immediately curled into a ball, still shaking, her wet dress leaving a dark stain on the worn blanket. Yates worked quickly, getting the fire started in the pot-bellied stove, coaxing the kindling to catch. Once flames were crackling, he turned his attention back to the woman. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said quietly, keeping his voice gentle. "You will freeze if you do not." Her eyes opened, dark brown and ringed with exhaustion, and she looked at him with such wariness that he felt like a wolf being trusted by a wounded deer. "I have nothing else," she whispered. He went to the trunk in the corner, the one kept stocked with supplies for whoever needed them, and pulled out a faded flannel shirt and wool blanket. "Use these. I will turn around and tend the fire." Yates kept his word, facing the stove and feeding it larger pieces of wood while he listened to the rustling sounds behind him. It took her a long time, her movements slow and pained, but finally she spoke. "I'm decent." He turned to find her sitting on the bunk wrapped in the blanket, his shirt drowning her small frame. Her wet dress lay in a heap on the floor. She had tried to comb her fingers through her hair, but it still hung in tangled ropes past her shoulders. In the firelight, he could see her face properly now, the delicate features, the high cheekbones, the full mouth that might have been quick to smile in better times. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old. "You hurt anywhere besides those bruises?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just cold. So cold." He found the tin of coffee and the supplies and set about making a pot, strong and black. The cabin warmed slowly, the storm continuing to rage outside. When the coffee was ready, he poured her a cup and brought it to her, their fingers brushing as she took it. She wrapped both hands around the warm tin and breathed in the steam. "Thank you," she said softly. "You saved my life." "Who did that to you?" The question came out harder than he intended. Her hands tightened on the cup. "My husband." The word hung in the air between them. Yates felt his jaw clench, but he said nothing, just waited. After a long moment, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Martin Westbrook. We have been married 8 months. He brought me out from Missouri, promised me a good life, a ranch of our own." She laughed, a bitter sound. "There is no ranch. Just a falling-down shack 20 miles south of Parowan, and a man who turns into a monster when he drinks, which is most every night." "Where were you headed?" "Anywhere. I did not have a plan. I just ran when he passed out this afternoon. I took one of the horses and rode until she went lame, Then I kept walking. She looked down at her bare feet, scraped and bleeding. I did not get very far. Yates crouched in front of her, examining her feet with gentle hands. These need tending. Stay put. He found the medical kit, basic but serviceable, and cleaned her wounds with careful efficiency. She flinched, but did not pull away, watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. When he finished, he sat back on his heels. "What is your name?" "Miriam," she said. "Miriam Westbrook, though I would rather throw that last name into the nearest ravine." "Yates Quinlan. I work for the Double R Ranch, about 10 miles north of Parowan." He stood, going to check the coffee pot. "You cannot go back to him." "I know, but I have nowhere else to go, no money, nothing." Her voice cracked. "I left everything behind in Missouri to marry him. My family disowned me for it. They said I was making a mistake, that I barely knew him. But I thought I was in love." She wiped angrily at her eyes. "I was such a fool." "You were hopeful." "That is not the same as being a fool." She looked at him with surprise, as if she had not expected such words from a cowboy who looked as weathered and hard as the Utah landscape. And Yates did look hard, he knew, with his sun-darkened skin, the scar across his left eyebrow from a breaking horse, the lines around his eyes from squinting into too many harsh sunsets. He was 28 years old and felt twice that most days. "What will I do?" Miriam asked, and the despair in her voice made him want to put his fist through the wall. "First, you will get warm and rest, then we will figure it out." He poured himself a cup of coffee and settled into the chair by the stove. "Storm should blow through by morning. I will take you into Parowan to Mrs. Chen at the boarding house. She is a good woman, will give you a room and time to get your feet under you." "I have no way to pay." "I will handle it." She shook her head quickly. "I cannot ask you to do that. You have already done so much." "You did not ask. I am offering." He met her eyes steadily. "No one deserves to be treated the way he treated you. No one." Miriam looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me." Yates thought about that, about the real answer and the easy answer. He went with the truth. "My mother ran from my father when I was 10 years old. She took me and my sister and we left in the middle of the night, nothing but the clothes on our backs. A stranger helped us then, gave us shelter and passage to California. I've never forgotten that kindness." He took a sip of the bitter coffee. "Figure I owe that debt to the world." "What happened to your father?" "Drank himself to death within a year." He said it flatly, without emotion. "By then we were safe in San Francisco, and my mother had found work. She died 5 years ago. My sister is married to a banker in Sacramento, has 3 children. And you came to Utah?" "Needed open country. The city never sat right with me." He stretched his long legs toward the fire. "Found work at the Double R 3 years back. Good outfit, fair boss." They fell into silence, listening to the rain hammer the roof and the fire crackle in the stove. Miriam sipped her coffee slowly, color returning to her face. The shaking had finally stopped. Yates found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking, noticing the way the firelight caught in her dark hair, the delicate curve of her neck. He pushed the thoughts away. She was married, running from a bad situation, and the last thing she needed was another man looking at her with want in his eyes. "You should sleep," he said eventually. "Take the bunk. I will sit up and keep the fire going." "I cannot take the only bed." "You can and you will. You have been through hell today. Let me do this one small thing." She looked like she might argue, but exhaustion won out. She lay down on the bunk, pulling the blanket up to her chin, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into sleep. Yates added more wood to the fire and settled in for a long night. The storm finally broke just before dawn, the rain tapering off to a drizzle and then stopping altogether. Yates had dozed fitfully in the chair, jerking awake every time Miriam made a sound. She had cried out twice in her sleep, calling for help, and each time he had spoken softly until she settled again. Now, in the gray morning light, he could see her clearly, the bruises on her face darker than they had been the night before, purple and yellow spreading across her jaw. She woke slowly, her eyes fluttering open and focusing on him. For a moment, confusion crossed her face. Then memory returned and she sat up quickly, wincing. "Easy," Yates said. "You are safe." "I thought maybe I had dreamed it all." Her voice was hoarse from sleep. "No dream. Coffee is still hot if you want some." She accepted the cup gratefully, and they ate a simple breakfast of hardtack and jerky from the supplies. Neither spoke much. The silence between them felt comfortable somehow, despite having just met. When they finished, Yates saddled his horse and helped Miriam mount. She sat in front of him again, wrapped in the blanket, and he tried not to think about how right it felt to have her in his arms. The ride to Parowan took most of the morning, the trail muddy and treacherous from the rain. They passed a few other riders who tipped their hats but did not ask questions. That was the way of things out here. People respected privacy. As they descended into the valley where Parowan sat nestled against the red cliffs, Miriam tensed in his arms. What if he comes looking for me? Then he will have to go through me first. She turned her head to look at him, her face inches from his. You would do that? Stand up to him for me? Yes. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. She settled back against his chest and did not speak again until they reached the edge of town. Parowan in 1878 was a settlement of about 800 souls, mostly Mormon farmers and ranchers, with a scattering of Gentiles like Yates who worked the outlying spreads. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, some painted, most not. The boarding house run by Mrs. Chen sat at the far end, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Chen herself came out when she heard the horse, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small Chinese woman who had come to Utah during the railroad days and stayed when her husband died. She ran the cleanest, most respectable boarding house in town and took no nonsense from anyone. "Mr. Quinlan," she said, her sharp eyes taking in Miriam wrapped in the blanket. "What have you brought me?" Yates dismounted and helped Miriam down, steadying her when she swayed. "This is Miriam Westbrook. She needs a room and some help. I will pay for the first month." Mrs. Chen looked at the bruises on Miriam's face and her expression hardened. "Come inside, child. Let us get you properly dressed and fed." She glanced at Yates. "You can settle up later." Miriam looked back at Yates as Mrs. Chen led her toward the house. "Thank you," she said, and he heard everything she could not say in those 2 words. "I will check on you tomorrow," he called after her. He watched until they disappeared inside, then mounted his horse and headed for the Double R. He had work to do and a boss to explain things to, but his mind kept wandering back to the dark-haired woman with the bruised face and eyes full of broken dreams. The Double R Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of grazing land north of Parowan, owned by Robert Richardson, a former Texas Ranger who had come north after the Civil War. Richardson was a hard man but fair, and he listened without interruption as Yates explained what had happened. "Martin Westbrook," Richardson said when Yates finished. He was standing at the window of his office, looking out at the corrals. "I know the man. He drinks at the saloon most nights, runs his mouth about how his wife does not appreciate him." He turned to face Yates. "He's also a mean drunk who has been in 3 fights that I know of in the past month alone. She cannot go back to him." "I agree. But he is still her legal husband. The law will not help her much." Yates felt frustration rise in his chest. "So she is just supposed to accept being beaten?" "I did not say that. I'm just telling you how it is." Richardson studied him. "You planning to make this your problem?" "I already did when I picked her up off that trail." The rancher was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but watch yourself. Westbrook is the type to come looking for trouble, and he will not fight fair." Over the next week, Yates rode into town every day after work, ostensibly to pick up supplies or check on equipment, but everyone, including him, knew he was really going to see Miriam. Mrs. Chen would invite him in for coffee and he would sit in the parlor while Miriam told him about her day. She had found work helping Mrs. Chen with the cooking and cleaning in exchange for her room, and color had returned to her face. The bruises were fading to green and yellow. "I feel useful again," she told him on the 5th day, serving him a slice of apple pie she had baked. "Like I am worth something." "You were always worth something," Yates said. "Him treating you bad did not change that." She sat down across from him, smoothing her borrowed dress. Mrs. Chen had given her some clothes, simple but clean. "Tell me about the ranch. What is it like working with cattle?" He found himself talking more than he usually did, describing the daily routine of checking fences and moving herds, the satisfaction of a job done well, the beauty of sunrise over the Markagun Plateau. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was really hearing him. It had been a long time since anyone had listened to Yates like that. "Would you teach me to ride?" she asked suddenly. "Properly, I mean. I only ever sat on a horse a few times before I ran away, and I did not do it very well. You stayed on long enough to save your life. That counts as doing it well in my book. But I want to learn the right way. I want to be able to take care of myself." He saw the determination in her eyes and nodded. "Sunday afternoon. I will borrow a gentle mare from the ranch." Sunday dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect spring day that made a man glad to be alive. Yates rode into town leading Rosie, an old paint mare with the temperament of a saint. Miriam was waiting on the porch, dressed in split skirts Mrs. Chen had altered for her and looking nervous. "She is huge," Miriam said, eyeing the horse. "She is 15 hands, which is not huge at all. And she is the sweetest horse I know." Yates stroked Rosie's neck. "Come say hello." He spent the next hour teaching Miriam the basics, how to approach the horse, how to mount, how to sit in the saddle. She was a quick learner, unafraid despite her nervousness, and by the end of the lesson she was walking Rosie in circles around the field behind the boarding house with a grin on her face. "This is wonderful," she called out. "I feel like I could ride forever." Yates felt something warm unfurl in his chest watching her, something he had not felt in years. It scared him a little, how much he looked forward to seeing her, how often she occupied his thoughts. She was still married, still legally bound to a man who had hurt her, and he had no right to these feelings. But they kept growing anyway. The trouble came on a Thursday evening 2 weeks after Yates had found Miriam. He was in the general store picking up coffee when Martin Westbrook walked in, already drunk despite it being only 6 o'clock. Westbrook was a big man, gone soft around the middle, with mean little eyes and a mouth that turned down at the corners. "Well, well," Westbrook said, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "If it is not the cowboy who stole my wife." Yates turned slowly, keeping his hands visible and relaxed. "I did not steal anything. I helped someone who needed help. She is my wife, my property. You had no right. She's a human being, not property." Westbrook took a step closer and Yates could smell the whiskey coming off him in waves. "Where is she? That Chinese woman would not tell me. And she will not tell you now either. Miriam does not want to see you." "I do not care what she wants. She's coming home with me." "No, she is not." The punch came fast, but Yates was faster, ducking under Westbrook's wild swing and stepping back. The storekeeper, Mr. Palmer, came around the counter quickly. "Take this outside," Palmer said firmly. "I will not have fighting in my store." Westbrook glared at Yates. "This is not over. She is my wife, and I will have her back." "Over my dead body," Yates said quietly. "That can be arranged." Westbrook turned and staggered out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Palmer looked at Yates with concern. "You better watch yourself." "He means it." "So do I." Yates paid for his coffee and headed straight to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen answered his knock, her face troubled. "He was here earlier," she said, pounding on the door, demanding to see Miriam. "I told him she was not here, and if he did not leave, I would fetch the sheriff." "Where is she?" "Upstairs, frightened half to death. Go on up. Second door on the right." He climbed the narrow stairs and knocked softly. "Miriam, it is Yates." The door opened immediately and she pulled him inside, her face pale. "He found me. He's going to make me go back." "No, he's not." Yates took her hands, which were ice cold despite the warm evening. "I will not let that happen. You cannot fight him forever. And the law is on his side." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I am trapped. There has to be a way." He wiped the tears away with his thumb, the gesture intimate and tender. "Divorce, maybe." "On what grounds? I have no proof of the abuse beyond these fading bruises, and even if I did, it would take months, maybe years, and I would need money for a lawyer." She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should just disappear. Leave Utah, go somewhere he cannot find me." "Run for the rest of your life? That is no way to live. It is better than going back to him." Yates wanted to argue, but she was right. He had seen men like Westbrook before, men who saw their wives as possessions to be controlled. The law would not help Miriam, not really. The courts rarely granted divorces, and when they did, it was usually on grounds of adultery or abandonment, neither of which applied here. "Then we find another way," he said. "What way?" He did not have an answer. Not yet. That night Yates lay awake in the bunkhouse, staring at the ceiling and thinking. The other ranch hands were snoring around him, but his mind was racing. There had to be a solution, some way to keep Miriam safe and free from Westbrook's reach. The more he thought about it, the more one possibility kept rising to the surface. Crazy and impossible, and yet maybe the only option. In the morning, he rode into Parowan and went straight to the law office of Samuel Morrison, the only lawyer in town. Morrison was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a reputation for honesty. "Mr. Quinlan," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair, "what can I do for you?" Yates explained the situation, leaving nothing out. When he finished, Morrison sat back, steepling his fingers. "Legally, she is in a difficult position," Morrison said. "As her husband, Westbrook has every right to demand she return to him. If she refuses, he can petition the court to force her compliance. Even though he beats her? Proving that would require witnesses or ongoing evidence. Bruises fade, and from what you tell me, there was no one else present when the abuse occurred." Morrison sighed. "I'm not saying it is right. I am saying it is the law. What if she was not married to him anymore? Divorce is extremely difficult and time-consuming. I could file the paperwork, but it would likely be denied, and in the meantime, Westbrook could force her back." Yates leaned forward. "What if she married someone else?" Morrison's eyebrows shot up. "While still married to Westbrook? That would be bigamy. What if Westbrook was dead?" "Mr. Quinlan, I hope you are not suggesting—" No, I would not kill him." Yates ran a hand through his hair. "I'm just trying to find a solution here." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "There is one possibility, though it is ethically questionable. If Westbrook could be convinced to annul the marriage, that would dissolve it immediately. Annulments are granted when the marriage was never valid to begin with. On what grounds? Fraud, coercion, inability to consummate, any number of reasons." Morrison looked uncomfortable. "But Westbrook would have to agree to it, and why would he? What if he thought she was already married when she married him? Would that make it invalid? If there was proof of a prior marriage, yes, but creating false proof would be fraud, and I cannot be party to that." Yates stood. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Quinlan, whatever you are thinking, be careful. The law can be a harsh master when crossed." Yates left the office with his mind churning. He could not create a false prior marriage, but what if Miriam could get an annulment on other grounds? What if she could prove the marriage to Westbrook was built on fraud, that he had lied about his circumstances to convince her to marry him? He went to the boarding house and found Miriam in the kitchen, kneading bread. When she saw him, her face lit up in a way that made his heart skip. "You came back," she said. "I always come back." He glanced at Mrs. Chen, who was pretending not to listen. "Can we talk privately?" They went to the parlor, and he explained what the lawyer had said. Miriam listened intently, her hands twisting in her apron. "He did lie to me," she said when Yates finished. "About the ranch, about his prospects, about who he was. I have the letters he sent me in Missouri, full of promises that never came true. That might be enough for an annulment claim. At least it would start the legal process. But even if we file, he could still try to force me back before it is resolved. Not if you had protection, someone who would stand between you and him." She met his eyes. "You. Me." Miriam stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." Yates joined her at the window. "I know enough. I know you are brave and kind. I know you deserve better than what he gave you. I know that when I found you in that storm, something changed for me." He hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I care about you, Miriam, more than I probably should." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "I care about you too. I think I started to the moment you carried me to that cabin." She touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the scar on his eyebrow. "But I am still married. And even if I was not, I come with nothing but trouble." "I have never minded trouble." She smiled, a real smile that transformed her whole face. "Let us talk to Mr. Morrison together, see if we can build a case for annulment." Over the next 3 weeks, they worked with Samuel Morrison to build their case. Miriam showed him the letters from Westbrook, full of descriptions of a prosperous ranch and a comfortable home. Morrison interviewed people who knew Westbrook's actual circumstances, the falling down shack and lack of prospects. It was not much, but it might be enough. During those weeks, Yates and Miriam grew closer, spending every spare moment together. He continued teaching her to ride, and she proved to be a natural, soon cantering across the fields with confidence. They took long walks in the evening, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, the fear of his father, and the relief when they finally escaped. She told him about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 4 daughters, how she had dreamed of adventure and found nightmare instead. "I was so naive," she said one evening as they sat by the creek that ran past town. "I thought love would be like the novels I read, all grand passion and devotion." "Maybe it still can be," Yates said, "with the right person." She looked at him, the setting sun turning her dark eyes amber. "Do you believe in second chances?" "I do now." He kissed her then, soft and careful, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her arms coming up around his neck. The kiss deepened, and Yates felt like he was falling, tumbling head over heels into something bigger than himself. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I should not have done that," he said. "You are still, I know what I am legally, but in my heart, I have not been his wife for a long time." She touched his face again. "In my heart, I think I might be falling in love with you." "Miriam, I know it is fast, I know it is complicated, but it is true. I am falling in love with you too," he admitted. "Have been since I saw you shaking in that rain." They sat by the creek until full dark, talking about the future they might have together if the annulment came through. It felt dangerous to hope, but Yates could not help it. For the first time in years, he wanted something more than just the next day's work. The annulment filing hit Parowan like a thunderclap. Westbrook showed up at the boarding house the day after Morrison submitted the paperwork, drunk and furious. Mrs. Chen would not let him in, standing in the doorway like a fierce little guardian. "You cannot keep me from my wife," Westbrook bellowed. "She is not your wife much longer if she has her way," Mrs. Chen shot back. "Now get off my property before I fetch the sheriff. I will talk to her whether you like it or not." Yates arrived then, having heard the shouting from down the street. He stepped between Westbrook and the door, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "You heard Mrs. Chen. Time to go." Westbrook's face was purple with rage. "This is all your fault. You turned her against me. You did that yourself when you started using her as a punching bag. She is my wife. I can discipline her as I see fit. Not anymore, you cannot." Westbrook swung at him, and this time Yates did not duck. He took the punch on the shoulder and responded with one of his own, a solid right hook that sent Westbrook stumbling back. Before the fight could escalate, the sheriff arrived, a tall man named Crawford who had no patience for public brawling. "That is enough," Crawford said, stepping between them. "Westbrook, go sleep it off. Quinlan, get inside." "He started it," Westbrook protested. "I do not care who started it. I am ending it." Crawford pointed down the street. "Go. Now." Westbrook went, but the look he threw over his shoulder promised this was far from over. Inside the boarding house, Miriam was waiting, her face pale. "I heard the fighting. He's gone. For now." Yates flexed his hand, which was starting to swell. "Morrison thinks the annulment hearing will be in about 2 weeks. Can you hold on until then?" "With you here? I can hold on forever." The 2 weeks crawled by. Westbrook made several more attempts to see Miriam, each time turned away by Mrs. Chen or Yates or the sheriff. The whole town was talking about it, taking sides. Most of the women supported Miriam, having seen Westbrook's temper themselves. Most of the men were uncomfortable with a wife defying her husband, legal grounds or not. Robert Richardson called Yates into his office 4 days before the hearing. "This situation with Mrs. Westbrook is causing talk," Richardson said without preamble. "I know. Some of the other ranchers are saying I should fire you, that you are causing trouble." Yates felt his stomach drop. "Are you going to?" Richardson was quiet for a long moment. "My wife left me once, back in Texas before the war. I drank too much, gambled too much, was not the husband she deserved. She took our daughter and went to live with her sister." He looked out the window. "It took me 6 months to get her back, to prove I had changed. Best 6 months of my life, because it made me look at who I was and who I wanted to be. He turned back to Yates. I am not firing you. What you are doing is right, and I will not punish a man for standing up for what is right. Relief flooded through Yates. Thank you, sir. Just be ready. Westbrook is not going to let this go without a fight. The hearing was held in the small courthouse on a Tuesday morning. Judge Artemis Blake presided, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness. Miriam wore her best dress, borrowed from Mrs. Chen, and sat beside Samuel Morrison at the plaintiff's table. Westbrook sat across from them with his own lawyer, a man named Turnbull, who was known for taking unsavory cases. Yates sat in the gallery, his hands clenched on his knees as he listened to Morrison present the evidence. The letters Westbrook had sent, full of false promises, the testimony of people who had seen Westbrook's actual living conditions, Miriam's own account of the lies he had told her. Turnbull countered that marriage was not a business contract, that exaggeration in courtship was natural and expected, that Miriam had willingly entered into the union. He painted her as an ungrateful wife, influenced by outside forces, meaning Yates to abandon her sacred vows. Then Westbrook took the stand, and Yates saw Miriam go rigid beside Morrison. I love my wife, Westbrook said, and he actually sounded sincere. I admit I was not always truthful about my circumstances, but I thought I could make it right. I thought we would build something together. He looked directly at Miriam. I know I have a temper. I know I hurt you and I am sorry for that, but I want to make it right. Give me another chance. It was a good performance. Yates could see some of the spectators softening. Even Judge Blake looked thoughtful. Morrison stood for cross-examination. Mr. Westbrook, you say you have a temper. How many times did you strike your wife? I do not know. A few times. I was drinking. So you admit to physically abusing her? I admit I made mistakes. Did you threaten to kill her if she left? Westbrook hesitated. I may have said things in anger. Is that a yes? I did not mean it. Morrison let that hang in the air. Your Honor, this man admits to physically abusing his wife and making death threats. The fraud that brought Mrs. Westbrook into this marriage is clear from the evidence. She was promised a prosperous life and instead found poverty and violence. I ask the court to grant the annulment and free her from this sham of a union. Judge Blake called a recess to consider. Yates met Miriam outside the courthouse, taking her trembling hands in his. Whatever happens, we will face it together, he said. I am so scared. What if he rules against me? Then we will appeal, or we will leave, go somewhere Westbrook cannot find you. I do not want to run anymore. Then we will stand and fight. An hour later, they were called back inside. Judge Blake looked at them all gravely. I have considered the evidence and testimony carefully. This is not an easy decision. He paused, and Yates felt Miriam's hand tighten on his arm. However, it is clear that Mr. Westbrook engaged in deliberate fraud to induce Mrs. Westbrook into marriage. His letters paint a picture of prosperity that did not exist. Further, his admission of physical abuse and threats demonstrates a pattern of behavior that makes reconciliation impossible. Blake looked at Westbrook. The annulment is granted. This marriage is declared null and void from its inception. Miriam made a small sound, and Yates wrapped his arm around her as she sagged against him. Around them, people were reacting, some pleased, some scandalized. Westbrook stood abruptly, his face furious. This is not over, he said, pointing at Miriam. You will regret this. Mr. Westbrook, you will refrain from threatening the plaintiff, or you will be held in contempt, Judge Blake said sharply. Westbrook stormed out, Turnbull hurrying after him. Morrison turned to Miriam with a smile. You are free, Mrs. Westbrook. Or should I say, Miss Walker again? Miriam started crying, tears of relief streaming down her face. Yates held her while she shook, feeling his own eyes sting. It was over. She was free. Outside the courthouse, people congratulated them, though some of the older men looked disapproving. Yates did not care. He only cared about the woman beside him, who was smiling through her tears. What do I do now? She asked. I have never been free before. I went from my father's house to Martin's. I do not even know who I am without someone telling me. You figure it out, and I will be here while you do. Over the next few months, Miriam did exactly that. She continued working at the boarding house but also started taking on sewing work, discovering she had a talent for it. Women came to her for alterations and new dresses, and soon she was making enough money to start saving. She talked about maybe opening her own dress shop someday. Yates courted her properly, with Sunday rides and dinners at the hotel restaurant and dances at the community hall. They took things slow, both of them wary of rushing into anything after what Miriam had been through. But the love between them grew steadily, deepening into something solid and sure. 6 months after the annulment, Yates took her on a ride up into the mountains, to a meadow filled with wildflowers and ringed by aspen trees. They had a picnic and talked about the future. "I have been thinking," Yates said, working up his courage, "about what comes next. What comes next for you or for us? For us. If there is an us. If you want there to be." He was fumbling the words, his usual calm deserting him. "What I mean is, I love you, Miriam. I think I have loved you since I saw you shaking in that rain. And I know you have been through hell, and maybe you are not ready. But I have to ask." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple gold band with a tiny diamond. "Will you marry me?" Miriam stared at the ring, tears welling in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I'm such a mess, Yates. I have nightmares still. Sometimes I flinch when anyone moves too fast. I do not know if I will ever be whole again." "You are already whole. You are the strongest person I know." He took her hand. "And I will spend every day proving to you that love does not have to hurt, that marriage can be a partnership of equals, that you are safe with me, if you will let me." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her, soft and sweet, there in the meadow with the aspens whispering above them. When they rode back to town, they were both grinning like fools. They were married in early November of 1878 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Parowan. Mrs. Chen stood up for Miriam, and Richardson stood up for Yates. Half the town came to the wedding, filling the pews. Miriam wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. She looked beautiful and happy and free. Westbrook did not show up, though Yates had half expected him to. Word was he had left town a month earlier, heading back east. The sheriff had made it clear Westbrook was not welcome in Parowan anymore, not after the threats he had made. The newlyweds moved into a small house on the edge of town, close enough to Miriam's sewing clients and Yates's work at the ranch. It was not much, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. On their wedding night, Yates was careful and gentle, making sure Miriam felt safe and cherished. They took their time discovering each other, building new memories to replace the bad ones. Their first winter together was hard in the way all first winters are, learning to live with someone else's habits and quirks. But they worked through the rough patches with patience and communication. Yates learned that Miriam needed space sometimes, that she would get quiet when the memories pressed too close. Miriam learned that Yates showed his love through actions more than words, that he would ride through a blizzard to bring her the ribbon she had mentioned wanting from the general store. Spring came, and with it, new beginnings. Miriam's sewing business was thriving, and Yates got a promotion at the ranch, making him the head wrangler. They started talking about buying land of their own someday, maybe raising horses. "I never thought I could be this happy," Miriam said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "After everything that happened, I thought I was broken forever." "You were never broken, just hurt. There is a difference." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for finding me in that storm. Thank you for not riding past. I would find you in 1,000 storms," Yates said, "every single time." In the summer of 1879, Miriam discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified her at first, memories of her mother dying in childbirth when Miriam was 12, but Yates held her and promised he would be with her every step of the way. They prepared carefully, saving money for the doctor and getting advice from Mrs. Chen, who had helped deliver dozens of babies over the years. Their son was born in early March of 1880, a squalling red-faced thing they named Thomas after Yates's grandfather. Miriam's labor was long and difficult, but she came through it strong, and when Yates held his son for the first time, he felt something crack open in his chest, a tenderness so fierce it almost hurt. "We made a person," he said in wonder. "We made a family," Miriam corrected, smiling despite her exhaustion. Fatherhood changed Yates in ways he had not expected. He became even more protective, working harder to save money for his family's future. He cut back on ranch work to spend more time at home, helping with Thomas in the household chores. Miriam continued her sewing work, fitting it in between nursing the baby and managing the house. They were happy. Not perfectly, because no life is perfect, but genuinely, deeply happy in the way that matters. When Thomas was 2, they bought 20 acres north of town, a piece of land with good grass and a creek running through it. Yates started building a house with his own hands, working every spare moment. It took a year, but when it was finished, it was solid and spacious, with a real kitchen for Miriam and a workshop where she could do her sewing. Richardson sold them 5 horses at a fair price, and Yates started his breeding program, focusing on sturdy ranch horses that could handle Utah's rough terrain. Word spread quickly about the quality of his stock, and soon he was selling horses to ranches across the territory. In 1883, Miriam gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Charlotte. The birth was easier this time, and Miriam recovered quickly. Charlotte had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she ruled the household from the moment she arrived. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, seasons passing in the familiar cycle of calving and harvest, branding and roundup. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Charlotte was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and catching frogs and driving her mother to distraction. Yates sometimes thought about that night in the storm, how close he had come to riding past Miriam, to leaving her there. The thought made him cold. Every good thing in his life had flowed from that single moment of compassion, that decision to stop and help. In the fall of 1885, they heard that Martin Westbrook had died back in Missouri, liver failure from years of drinking. Miriam felt nothing when she heard the news, just a distant sadness for the man he might have been if he had been different. "I wasted too much time hating him," she told Yates. "I do not want to waste any more thinking about him at all." They never spoke of Westbrook again. The children grew, and the years passed, each one adding its own joys and sorrows. They lost a baby in 1887, a son born too early who lived only an hour. The grief was crushing, but they held each other through it, finding strength in their partnership. A year later, Miriam gave birth to healthy twin girls, Emma and Grace, and the house was full of noise and laughter again. In 1890, Utah became a state, and Parowan held a celebration. Yates and Miriam took the whole family into town for the festivities, watching the fireworks and eating pie and dancing in the street. Thomas, now 10, asked his father about the old days. Was it really wild back then, with outlaws and gunfights? Yates thought about it. Sometimes. But mostly it was just hard work and ordinary people trying to make a life, same as now. "How did you and Mama meet?" Yates looked at Miriam, who was dancing with Charlotte while the twins ran circles around them. "I found her in a storm. Best thing I ever did. By 1895, they owned 100 acres and ran 30 horses. Thomas worked alongside his father, showing a natural talent for training. Charlotte had discovered a love of books and talked about becoming a teacher. The twins were 8 and terrorized the local schoolhouse with their pranks. Mrs. Chen passed away that year at the age of 72, leaving her boarding house to Miriam in her will. Miriam wept at the funeral, remembering the fierce little woman who had given her shelter when she had nothing. "She saved me," Miriam told Yates, "just like you did. You saved yourself. We just gave you the space to do it." They sold the boarding house and used the money to buy more land, expanding the horse operation. Yates was 45 now, his hair going gray at the temples, his body carrying the scars of decades of ranch work. Miriam was 40, still beautiful, laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. On their 17th wedding anniversary, Yates took her back to the meadow where he had proposed. It looked the same, aspens whispering in the breeze, wildflowers scattered across the grass. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" he asked. I said yes. Before that, you said you did not know if you would ever be whole again. I remember. Were you wrong? Miriam thought about it, about the years of healing and growth, the slow process of learning to trust again. I do not think I was wrong. I think wholeness is not about being undamaged. It is about accepting the damage and building something beautiful anyway. She took his hand. You helped me do that. We helped each other. They sat in the meadow until sunset, talking about their children and their dreams for the future. Thomas wanted to start his own ranch someday. Charlotte had received a scholarship to the Teachers College in Salt Lake City. The twins were still wild cards, impossible to predict. We did good, Miriam said. We built a good life. We did better than good. We built something real. In 1900, Thomas married a girl from Cedar City named Sarah and brought her home to the ranch. Yates built them a small house on the property and taught his son everything he knew about horses and land and making a life from hard work. Thomas's first child, a son they named Yates after his grandfather, was born in 1901. Charlotte graduated from college and came home to teach at the Parowan School. She boarded with a family in town during the week and came home on weekends full of stories about her students. The twins, now 13, were starting to settle down into young ladies, though they still had their wild moments. Yates was 51 and thinking about slowing down, letting Thomas take over more of the day-to-day work. His joints ached in the mornings, and he could not ride as long as he used to. But he was content in a way he had never imagined possible when he was a young man running from his past. One evening in early spring of 1902, a storm rolled in like the ones that used to come in the old days. Yates and Miriam sat on the porch of their house, watching the lightning crack across the sky. The rain came down in sheets, turning the yard to mud. "Remember the night we met?" Miriam asked. "Every detail. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not stopped? If you had ridden past? Every day. And every day I thank God I did not." She leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his arm the way she always had. "You know what I remember most? Not the rain or the cold, but the way you picked me up without asking any questions. You just helped. No judgment, no demands, just pure kindness. You looked like you needed help. I needed saving, and you saved me." "We saved each other," Yates corrected. "You taught me how to love, how to be a husband and father. Before you, I was just drifting, working, and sleeping, and not much else. You gave me purpose." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the storm. It was not as fierce as the one from all those years ago, but it reminded them both of where they had started. "If you could go back," Miriam said, "and tell that scared girl in the storm one thing, what would it be?" Yates thought about it. That the hard parts do not last forever. That healing is possible. That she is stronger than she knows. What would you tell the cowboy who found her? That stopping to help is the bravest thing he will ever do, and that it will change his life in ways he cannot imagine. The storm passed and the stars came out, bright and clear in the washed sky. Inside the house they could hear the twins getting ready for bed, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to blow out the lamp. From the small house across the yard came the sound of baby Yates crying, quickly soothed by Sarah's gentle voice. "This is everything," Miriam said softly. "Everything I never dared to dream about." "It is everything I never knew I wanted," Yates agreed. They went inside eventually, checking on the twins and banking the fire for the night. In their bedroom, the one they had shared for more than 20 years, they got ready for bed with the easy familiarity of long marriage. Yates watched Miriam brush out her hair, still long though streaked with gray now, and felt the same tenderness he had felt that first night in the line shack. "I love you," he said. She smiled at him in the mirror. "I love you too. Always have. Always will." They climbed into bed and Miriam curled against his side, her head on his chest. Within minutes she was asleep, but Yates stayed awake a while longer, listening to her breathe, feeling grateful for every single day they had been given. The years continued to unfold. Charlotte married a schoolteacher from Parowan in 1904, and they moved to Salt Lake City, where he had been offered a position at a boys' academy. The twins, Emma and Grace, went to college together, Emma studying to be a nurse and Grace interested in law, rare for a woman, but the times were changing. Thomas took over the ranch operation completely in 1906, and Yates finally retired, spending his days fixing things around the property and spoiling his grandchildren. He and Miriam had 4 grandchildren by then, with more on the way. In the spring of 1910, 32 years after that night in the storm, Yates fell ill with pneumonia. He fought it hard, not ready to leave Miriam or the life they had built, but sometimes the body has its own timeline. On a warm May evening, surrounded by his wife and children, he slipped away peacefully. Miriam was devastated, but she was not broken. She had been tested by fire before and had emerged stronger. She leaned on her children and grandchildren, on the community they had built, on the memories of more than 3 decades of love. She lived another 12 years, watching her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren arrive. She taught them all to sew and told them stories about the old days, about their grandfather who had been the kindest man she ever knew. She told them about the night he found her in the storm, how one act of compassion had changed everything. "Never ride past someone who needs help," she would say. "You never know what kind of blessing they might turn out to be." Miriam passed away in her sleep in 1922 at the age of 67, surrounded by family in the house Yates had built with his own hands. They buried her next to him in the Parowan Cemetery, under the cottonwood trees, their headstones side by side. The inscription on Miriam's stone read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she overcame." The inscription on Yates's read, "Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he stopped to help." Their descendants would go on to fill southern Utah, teachers and ranchers and nurses and lawyers, all of them carrying forward the legacy of 2 people who found each other in a storm and built something beautiful from pain and compassion. The horse ranch still operates today, run by the great-great-grandchildren of Yates and Miriam Quinlan, a testament to what can grow from a single moment of kindness on a rain-soaked night in 1878. The story of how their great-great-grandparents met has become family legend, told and retold at reunions and gatherings, a reminder that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. And sometimes, on spring evenings when the storms roll in across the Utah desert, people in Parowan swear they can see 2 figures on horseback riding through the rain, a cowboy and the woman he saved, together forever in the wild country they loved. It is just a story, of course, a romantic notion, but then again, their whole life together started with a moment that seemed impossible, and they turned it into something real and lasting and true. So maybe, just maybe, love really is strong enough to transcend even death, binding 2 souls together across time and space, forever riding through the storms toward home. The meadow where Yates proposed still blooms with wildflowers every spring, and the aspens still whisper in the breeze. The small house he built for Thomas and Sarah is gone now, reclaimed by the land, but the main house stands strong, renovated and modernized, but still essentially the same structure Yates built with his own hands. The creek still runs clear and cold through the property, and the horses still graze in the fields, descendants of those first 5 horses Richardson sold to a young cowboy with a dream. In the family Bible, carefully preserved, are Miriam's letters from Martin Westbrook, the ones that helped her gain her freedom. Her descendants look at them sometimes, marveling at how close they came to never existing, how their whole family line hung on a judge's decision and a cowboy's compassion. There's also a dried flower from that meadow, pressed between the pages where Yates and Miriam's marriage is recorded. No one remembers who put it there or when, but it has been there for over a century now, a small piece of their love story preserved forever. The dress Miriam wore to her wedding is in a museum in Salt Lake City, part of an exhibit on pioneer women. The placard next to it tells her story, how she escaped an abusive marriage and found true love, how she built a successful business and raised a family and lived to see Utah transform from territory to state. She is held up as an example of resilience and courage, and school children write reports about her. What the placard does not capture is the way Yates would look at her even after 30 years of marriage, like she was the most precious thing in the world. It does not capture the sound of her laugh or the feel of her hand in his. It does not capture the 1,000 small moments that make up a life together, the fights and reconciliations, the shared joys and weathered sorrows, the quiet contentment of simply existing in the same space. But those who knew them remember. Their children and grandchildren carry those memories, passing them down through the generations. They tell of a love that started in tragedy and transformed into triumph, of 2 damaged people who healed each other, of a partnership built on respect and trust and genuine affection. On the anniversary of their wedding day, the family still gathers at the old house. They have dinner together, all the descendants who can make it, filling the rooms with laughter and noise. After dinner, they go to the cemetery and put flowers on the graves, telling Yates and Miriam about their lives, about the family that continues to grow from the seeds those two planted so long ago. And if you ask any of them what they learned from their ancestors' story, they will all say the same thing, that kindness matters, that love is worth fighting for, that broken things can be mended, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop to help a stranger trembling in the rain. Because you never know. That stranger might just be the answer to a prayer you did not know you were praying. They might be the beginning of everything good in your life. They might be the person you were always meant to find. Yates and Miriam Quinlan proved that in their own quiet way, living out their days in southern Utah, building a family and a legacy that would outlast them by generations. They proved that the Wild West was not just about outlaws and shootouts and gold rushes. It was also about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about surviving and thriving against the odds, about finding love in the most unlikely places. Their story is not unique in its elements. There were many abused wives who ran, many kind strangers who helped, many second-chance romances in the frontier territories. But it was unique in its particulars, in the specific alchemy of those two souls finding each other at exactly the right moment, when each needed the other most. And perhaps that is the real magic of their story. Not that it was exceptional, but that it was possible at all. That in a hard land, during a hard time, two people could find each other and build something soft and safe and lasting. That love could bloom from trauma, that trust could be rebuilt, that happily ever after was not just a fairy tale, but something you could work toward and achieve. The rain still comes to southern Utah, sweeping across the red rocks and sage flats, turning the dust to mud and the creeks to rivers. And every time it does, someone in the Quinlan family thinks of Yates and Miriam, of that night in 1878 when everything changed because a cowboy decided to stop and help. They think of it, and they smile, grateful for the choice he made, grateful for the life she fought to reclaim, grateful for the love story that gave them all existence. And they try to live up to that legacy, stopping to help when they see someone in need, fighting for love when it matters, building something beautiful from whatever materials life provides. Because that is what Yates and Miriam taught them. That is the inheritance they left behind, more valuable than land or money or possessions. They left the knowledge that one moment of compassion can change everything, that love is worth the risk, that healing is possible, and that the human heart is far stronger and more resilient than we ever imagine. So the story continues, generation after generation, the tale of the cowboy and the woman trembling in the rain, finding each other in the storm and walking together into the light. It is a story of the American West, of hard times and harder choices, of survival and redemption and love that conquers all. And it is true. Every word of it. You can look it up in the records if you want, find their names in the census and the marriage register and the cemetery logs. But the real truth is not in those official documents. The real truth is in the lives they lived and the family they built and the love they shared for more than 3 decades. That is the truth that matters. Truth that is the story worth telling. And that is why, more than a century later, people still talk about Yates Quinlan and Miriam Walker, the cowboy and his bride, who proved that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simple decision to stop and help someone in need. Their love story became legend, but it started as something much simpler. 2 broken people finding wholeness in each other, one rainy night in the Utah Territory when a cowboy discovered a woman trembling in the downpour and carried her to warmth without a word. And from that wordless act of kindness grew a love that would span a lifetime and echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and the human heart's infinite capacity for healing and hope.